These are the top 5 mistakes I see beginner photographers make that I'm also guilty of making when I first started, and if somebody hadn't told me about them, I wouldn't have corrected them as fast as I did, so this is what I'm doing for you now. These are very simple things to fix, and they make all the difference for your pictures. Mistake number 1 is keeping a level horizon. Now, I'm an advocate for always doing things in camera if you can, so when you're out shooting, keep in mind that general principle is horizon should be straight. I see this all the time on Facebook and on Instagram for my family and friends that take beautiful sunsets on the beach and their horizon is wonky and it just ruins the picture. So if you've already taken the picture and you want to fix it in post, just go in your editing software of choice. I use Lightroom, and click on your crop tool and just twist the image so that the horizon is level. You can also click the horizon leveling tool and click and drag on the line of the horizon and it will straighten the image automatically for you. While we're on the subject of straightening lines, the second biggest mistake I see people making is when they're taking pictures of buildings and architectural photography and all their building lines are not parallel to each other. So basically this happens when you're taking a picture, unless you keep your camera looking straight at the horizon, the perspective will be off. So basically if you tilt your camera up, all the lines of the buildings will be going upwards, or if you tilt your camera down, all the lines will be going downwards. It's easy to fix in camera if you have a wide enough lens. If you keep your camera straight with the horizon, then all the lines should be straight. But if the composition you want to shoot doesn't fit within your frame, there are some lenses called tilt shift lenses that basically move the optics of the lens upward and it allows you to fit a lot more things in. Now I know not everybody can afford a specialized lens to shoot architecture. I don't even have one. So the best way to fix this, and the way I do it, is in Lightroom in post-production. I basically shoot so that I have everything within my frame, and I go in the develop module and scroll down all the way to transform and click that auto button. And if that doesn't fix the perspective, you can also try the full. And if that still doesn't fix the perspective, then you can try the guided tool where you can click and drag lines on the lines of the buildings and on the line of the horizon, and that will straighten up everything. The third biggest mistake I see photographers make involves portrait photography, and that is when you're shooting people and you basically cut off their limbs or their toes or their fingers or the top of their head. I'm sure you can create some really unique compositions if you want to and that's your intention, but my general rule is to either keep everything in frame, or if you really want to cut off a limb, cut strategically. The general rule is either cut at the middle of a limb, so at the middle of the shin, or at the middle of the thigh, at the middle of the forearm, or just above or below the joints. I almost never cut off the top of people's heads unless I want to go for a really close-up portrait. And it's really simple to fix with the crop tool in Lightroom. If you've made the mistake of chopping off fingers, you can just crop a bit closer in, and that will just make your picture look way better than before. The fourth tip also involves portraiture, and it's when people expose for the background rather than the face. This is a really easy mistake to actually make because the camera metering will usually grab the largest area and meter for that rather than the tiny little face that you might have in your shot. There's a couple of ways of fixing this in camera, and number one is using a flash that will make the exposure of the face match the exposure of the background. However, I don't like to use this a lot of the times because the flashlight is quite harsh, especially if it's an onboard camera flash. And so I like to use the second method, which is basically using a reflector to reflect the light back onto the model's face. And that makes a much nicer and smoother light source than a flash. If you don't have a flash or a reflector, this is really easy to fix in post. However, you need to be mindful when you're taking the pictures to have a nice average exposure so that your highlights aren't blown and your shadows aren't crushed. So when you bring it into Lightroom, you have room to play with it. And the way I do it is I crop in the face quite closely and I check my histogram. I increase the exposure so that the face is properly exposed. And usually when you do this, the background will be blown out completely. So then what I do is I grab a circular graduation filter and I click over the face to preserve the face's exposure, and I bring down the exposure for the background. And this usually works out really well to balance everything out. And the fifth big mistake I see beginner photographers make is not editing their pictures, or editing their pictures way too much. There's a lot of purist photographers out there who think that if you touch up their pictures then it's cheating, and if it's not straight out of the camera then it's not real photography or whatever. But what these people don't realize is that if you're shooting in RAW, and you should be shooting in RAW, basically your image sensor flattens out your image and makes it a bit grayer than what is actually reality, and that is to give you more dynamic range for you to play with when you're editing in your post-processing software. However, if you are shooting JPEG, there are color profiles that you can attach to the image, which basically bake the edit in. So it will bake in the contrast and the saturation and the sharpness and the clarity. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to do that. I want to have full control of my image. On the flip side of that, there's people who, when they're starting out, go way overboard with the edit, drag the clarity slider up and the saturation slider up and the sharpness. And I'm definitely, to this day, guilty of this. So what I like to do is I like to do my edit and then pull back 10 to 15% on all the sliders, or just come back the next day and have a look with fresh eyes that I haven't gone too far with the edit. So those are my 5 tips. I hope you enjoyed them. If you like this video, give me a like and consider subscribing for weekly videos. And hey, go out and make some pictures.